This is going to be a workflow that has the main goal of looking at public data or data of public companies and to summarize many of those documents that public companies release. It will be about programmatically finding company filings, 10Ks, 10Qs, earnings calls, and stuff like that, and everything that goes into it. So identifying the company stock ticker symbol, integrating the SEC API to find the right documents, and then handling the very large volumes of text that come with that. 10K is about 150 pages. So like you have to be really careful how you integrate that into a workflow because it's just a lot of data. And then also the challenge of summarizing the right way, because like you can't really throw all of those sources into one prompt. I'm sure in half a year that's probably possible, but at the moment that's still pretty tricky. So what I did was like chopping up those summaries and kind of creating a meta summary. What the workflow also does is identify types of partners that a company is working with, identify the top sponsors of their most important conference, and what it also does is to look at a certain list of service providers and checking if that company works together with that kind of approved list of service providers. So there's a lot in here. It's quite a bit of prompting, but more so like the logic, how to get all of this together in a workflow. So I want to start with how the workflow looks like A to Z. Why is there 5 columns hidden? Let's quickly look what's not there. Testing can go. Public status, okay, that looks good. So it's in the end about 50-60 column workflow, and the input data is really only the company domain and the company name. The next thing I did was to quickly build a company public status checker. I'm gonna go into that in a little bit, how I built that. That was quite interesting. Then I programmatically find, I always say programmatically, then I find the company stock ticker symbol, because that is used to search the SEC, the Stock Exchange Commission database, for those documents, 10Ks, 10Qs. The reason I did that is when you only do a Google search, let's say you say, find the Apple 10K. Let's do it. Probably it will be the demo effect, but Apple 10K. Okay, in this case, it actually did find the 2023 thing, but here we have a 2019. You can see a little bit of what I want to get at. The problem is that you can't control which document you are finding. And I know it looks easier to solve, but especially with those financial filings, every company has different fiscal quarters. So for example, Snowflake has, I think, already released their 2025 10K. Apple has released their 2023 10K, and so on and so on. So it's really not easy to say 10K 2024 or 2023 or something like that. There are many different ways to slice and dice this. My approach was to plug into the SEC and find those documents programmatically. The next thing that happens in this workflow is to search for the call transcripts and scrape those call transcripts. There's a specific reason why I did that. Then this is actually not important. Then there is the summaries of those documents that I just mentioned. That should start here. Yeah, the summaries of the 10K, 10Q, partnership summaries, summaries from the earnings calls, and then I summarize those summaries, and I will get into more detail why I did that and how I did that. Then there is this list of GSIs, global service integrators. I have a list of global service integrators that are interesting for the client, and we want to know if those global service integrators are mentioned in any of the documents. And this is the way I built that. It actually involves 2 LLMs and quite a few formulas, and I will go into detail why I did that. Then this is not necessary for the workflow. This was just an experiment. Yeah, and that's kind of it. So let's get into it. The first thing that I dropped in last minute, anyways, it's here in the beginning of the workflow because I realized I needed this check if it's a public company or not, because the data the client provided me did not only include public companies, and it's an expensive workflow, so I didn't want to run it for companies that are not public. What I did was actually to prompt ChatGPT what is the definitive way to identify if a company is public or not. I didn't want to build this completely from scratch, so I basically asked for what are the criteria to know if a company is public or not, and I put that into the prompt here. And what was important to me was what was important to me was the output format. So I wanted to know if it is public, what's the stock ticker symbol, and which stock exchange are they listed on. Example output for, okay, I'm not going to change the typo here. For a non-public company, not public. Example output for a public company would look like this. Beautiful, this worked. And then there's quite a few conditional formulas in the end that will not run if this contains not public, or only run if this contains is public. That's a really good way of doing that, which is actually, let's quickly look. Run condition not met. This will probably be it. Strategic partnership summary. Here is the only run if. Okay, I'm not sure why that doesn't show the prompt here, but basically this column only runs if this contains is public. The next thing that I did, I could have used the stock ticker symbol from here, but I actually used a different technique to do that. Again, this was built a few weeks apart, so maybe I could skip one of these steps, but it could be interesting. One thing I did here was to find the company stock ticker symbol, and the way I did that, when you look for it, this is my approach how to build these things. I hope you can see it. Snowflake stock ticker symbol in URL, in title stock. What that means is that it looks for the company name and stock ticker symbol, and it has to have finance.yahoo in the URL, and in the title, which is this part of the Google search result, it has to contain stock, because that will always give me this snippet, what you see here, snowflake, snow, blah, 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 blah. And because that will always look like this, I can actually use a formula to extract that. So I'm using the SERPer API. This is the SERPer search. When you do a Google search, that would be the exact Google search. And this is the search I want to do for all of those companies. This is how it looks. Company name, stock ticker symbol, and then we get organic results, and you find in the first organic result what I just said, and in the first parenthesis, I think it's called, or here in the title is where I looked. In the title, you find the stock ticker symbol, and what the formula does, get title, so it gets this result of the Google search result, and then extract what's between the first parentheses, and that always will be the stock ticker symbol. If it's not a public company, this will not be a search result that's relevant, so it cannot extract the stock ticker symbol. And when you look at the stock ticker symbol here and the stock ticker symbol here, they always match, which is pretty cool. And because I could see, oh wow, okay, so this is really matching, I didn't build some additional logic to actually verify it. But that would be really easy to say there are two ways to get somewhere, and please see if these two ways come to the same conclusion, and only then that would mean it's a public company. You can do that. In this case, I didn't do it. The results were really good. This stock ticker symbol is then dropped into this. I could probably, oh no, it's actually a formula, yeah. If the company domain is available, you have to do that because otherwise it doesn't run. Company domain will always be available, so that means this will always run. And then print, which means output this ticker, company stop ticker symbol, and which creates exactly this search term that you see here. With this, I can actually use it for the Edgar API. I think this is, let me quickly see that. Yeah, setup 10Q, and this finds the 10 Qs, and here the 10 Ks. This uses the same setup for the 10K, which is probably hidden or somewhere else here in that, and that gives me this kind of format back. So we find the stock ticker symbol, we drop that into the Edgar or the SEC search API, because this is a search term I need for that, and then I programmatically find the 10 Qs, 10 Ks. When you look here, again, we are looking at 10 Qs. This is the search result. We have the filings, and 0, it's in reverse chronological order. That means this is the latest 10 Q. And here's all the data formats in which we receive that from the SEC. What's beautiful is that one of these is more or less a plain HTML, which is actually great because that's relatively easily scrapable, accessible. You can drop that link into Claygent and do a lot of good work with that. So that's pretty cool. The same happens with the 10K. Okay, this should go here maybe. And this way I have the right documents always present in my workflow. The thing to find the earnings calls is basically a Google search. I used a little bit of a different approach here, but in the end, it's again, quote unquote, just a Google search that looks always on finance.yahoo.com, Snowflake earnings call, in title, transcript, in URL, the company stock ticker, and that gives me the most recent earnings calls, which is what we see in these search results. Organic, actually I don't know why it only returns 4, but that's fine. I didn't want it to return 10 or 20 or something anyways. So here we have the link to the earnings calls. And what I did then, because actually when you look at it, okay, this is seeking alpha, but something similar happens with Yahoo, you sometimes bump into a paywall. So because the earnings calls contain such important data, what I did, take those first 4 organic results. Oh, this is the wrong, this is investor relations. So take those first 4 organic results, because I always get those 4, and run a Zenrose scrape on all of these earnings calls. What that gives us is the earnings call transcript local in Clay. I don't care so much about that it's local, but it has 2 benefits. First, it's much more dependable because I can play around with how I want to scrape it with these settings, which is something you cannot do when you do it on just the Clayagent. When you say, hey Clayagent, go find those earnings calls, that is something where you don't control how those earnings calls are actually accessed. You can do that when you do individual scrapes, and this is great. So I have all of the earnings calls locally here. This we can ignore. This was some custom tech I was using. I'm also gonna ignore the partnership search stuff. But what happens here next is, strategic partnership summary. This is, let's see, for the 10K. So this is the prompt that I used to summarize the 10Ks. First thing, I used Clayagent Neon because it has a fantastically large context window available to us. This is something that's going to be super dynamic. It's going to change very quickly in half a year. This is not going to be a problem for anyone anymore. But at the moment, Clayagent Neon is really the way to go here. Like a few things that are interesting. So I follow, like, it's something I kind of came up with myself, Rido, role, instructions, data, and output. It's not a perfect prompt pattern, or actually, so it's a prompt pattern. It helps me to structure my prompts. So for example, role instructions. Instructions are also including the task for me. You could probably do that differently too, but this really works well for me. And what I even do is I put at the beginning that it must visit all of the links provided under sources. Take your time to do this. Time and effort do not matter. You must look at all provided sources. That is something I have seen good results with, because otherwise the model may only look at maybe the first source or the second source. You're a helpful web research agent, and you're an expert in analysis of financial documents and finance-related news articles. That gives the model good context. Provide a summary of at least 250 words about all strategic partnerships and co-selling for the company name. Be as specific as possible. Name concrete partner names if they appear in the provided document. So I think there's a lot of stuff in there that's worth going over. First, I'm pushing it to provide a quite comprehensive summary, because what I will do in the end is to create a summary of the summaries. And this means I want a lot of meat. I want a lot of data that final summary can run on. And this is why I'm pushing it to provide really a lot of output here. The other thing is about all strategic partnerships and co-selling. What's important here, I believe, is that the model understands is that it's going to look at financial documents, and it's supposed to look for strategic partnerships in financial documents. So that gives it a lot of context what it's going to look at. Importantly, be as specific as possible. Name concrete partner names if they appear in the provided document. So I don't want like just very general fluffy summaries of what a partnership is, but I want a concrete summary of what's in the document. I want partner names to always be mentioned, but I also made sure that only if they appear in the provided document or documents. The most important thing you can provide is names of companies, blah, 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 partners with. I'm pushing this prompt really hard to output partner names. Maybe I should have added here if they appear in the data. I didn't. Otherwise, you always run a little bit of a risk that the model just draws from its world knowledge who a company partners with. And this must not necessarily be wrong, but I want specifically, I want to find data that is in the documents I provide. And the source here is linked to filing details. When we go back to the SEC thing, 10Q findings, first one, and here we have the link to filing details. This is the document I'm pointing it to, which is just really great to know that I pointed to exactly the right document. That just produces so much higher quality output than just sending it out in the world and do that search for itself. So link to filing details, omit any general information about partnerships that would apply to any company, meaning I don't want stuff that is not specific to this company, right? I want specific information about partnerships with Snowflake, Workday, ServiceNow, and so on and so on. This is how I push the model to do that. Start your response with a forward description of the source you used, followed by your summary. Write at least 250 words. Actually, I think that didn't do quite as well as I wanted, so I would have to tweak more about the source attribution. But I think overall it gives a good idea how I summarized those 10Ks. And what's really, really nice is that these summaries are as comprehensive as I want them. And what's also cool is that what I do in the end when I do the meta summary, you see that I did the same prompt for the 10 Qs, I did a similar prompt for the news, I did a similar prompt for the earnings calls, and then I do a prompt to summarize all of these previous summaries. And what I'm doing here is not pointed only to the result, but I pointed to the whole cell. What that means is that the final summary also takes into account this part of the output, the reasoning. This is actually not such a great example, but here we see that the reasoning has quite a bit of really interesting stuff in it too, and I don't care. I just wanted to look at all of the data that is returned for this column. So I'm pointing it to the whole cell, not only to the individual result, and that actually makes a difference because it has much more valuable context to work with. And this is then the end summary that I'm producing. And going into that, here the prompt is actually pretty simple. I don't give it a lot of context here or this or that, because all of the context, what is the summary to be about, what should you look for, how should the summary be structured, that all has happened in the previous summaries. And with this, I can really say combine all information and summarize everything from, and then I drop in all the intermediate summaries. Again, I say be sure to include all company names. At every step, I'm defining what's important for me in the summary, in the intermediate summaries and in the final summary, and that is a really important step. Here, an example, maybe the examples would also have been good, or actually those examples are also in the intermediate prompts. But that's kind of how I look at it, really be very prescriptive of how the summaries should look like, be very certain that the summaries contain the information that I want, and then I can pretty simply say, hey, look at all of this stuff and combine and create a summary. There should be a system prompt in here, because I used, this is all local data, right? So I used the Anthropic thing. I don't know why I didn't use my own API key. Oh yeah, that was a technical issue. Anyways, this really looks at local data, and that also means I get to write a system prompt, which is be extremely factual, only summarizing from the provided data. Company names should always be included if they appear in the data. Start directly with your summary. Don't say things like based on the information. That's super standard stuff, but this is pretty important and seems to lead to really good results here. Pushing it to focus on what I want to know and have that in every step along the chain of this workflow. What I would really suggest doing is, when you do stuff that is not content creation, but in this case really just account intelligence, I'm setting the creativity to 0. What that basically does is it LLMs just predict the next word, quote unquote, just, but with lower creativity, it kind of doesn't take any chances. So it doesn't try to come up with like very creative wordings for things. It doesn't try to like write beautiful text. That is not what I care about. What I care about is accuracy. So it really makes sense to have the creativity on a very low level, because that kind of uses the highest probability next word and not the second best or the third best to create more variability in the output. I don't want variability in the output. I basically want the most likely prediction, because that's most likely what's actually in the data and not something else. Yeah, and that's it. That produces that full summary, and I actually think I should have started this video with the end result. This is what I put forward to the client. So like really detailed and always specific to individual partners. And now the client is actually picking that apart and saying, oh yeah, well, this looks great. This is really helpful for us. This is not so helpful for us. And what I can do is really go back to the individual columns, and I can just tweak it. So when I say, you know what, this comes out of the earnings calls and the earnings call summary is not as great or not as good as it could be, I can go back, I can adjust the earnings call summary, and potentially you can also fine tune the meta summary more, say, hey, prioritize the earnings call summary over all other data sources and provide more feedback or more insights about what's in there. So there's a lot of things I can then play around with. Yeah, and that's the part of building that summary part of the workflow.